Hey everybody, Ben here from Cinder Studios, and today I'm talking about 5 tools that I use that aren't really supposed to be used for painting. So every painter has palettes and brushes and their paints, but there's every now and then some tools you start to kind of build into your working set, in this case my big studio set, of things that really aren't supposed to be used for painting, but turns out they're actually pretty good for that. So the first one is tape, and no, I'm not just talking about masking tape. In fact, I'm not talking about masking tape at all. I'm talking about electrical tape, duct tape, and frog tape. Okay, this one is technically used for painting. I love electrical tape for painting purposes because it is a both waterproof and flexible tape. You can really kind of get a nice pull and stretch with it. Like, all right, what do you use a nice pull and stretch for? One thing is to tape the edges of my glass palettes, because when you have a glass palette and it's painted glass, you have a really kind of a sharp edge and you want to cover that up with something. I find the electrical tape works really well for that. You can also use duct tape or masking tape, and I've done that as well, but I find that the electrical tape in particular is really, really good for that. Another thing I use it for is when I have a brush for a while, what I tend to notice is that the metal ferrule keeping the bristles end of the brush to the wood end of the brush, or maybe plastic end of the brush, in place, that tends to kind of get loose after a while, especially on lower end brushes. So I will take electrical tape and put from that one edge of the ferrule, like down part of the edge of the brush. This one actually goes up quite a bit because I think I was covering up chipped paint. But that's the whole point of that, to get that good stretch and be able to really kind of get a nice tight grip on that brush. One thing you'll find if you watch a lot of my painting tutorials is a large number of my brushes have that electrical tape binding on them for that very reason. Duct tape, on the other hand, you're looking at it's duct tape. It has a ton of just crazy utility uses. Actually, a lot of the things attached to the wall up here are done with duct tape because it sticks to concrete super well. I use this at shows to just tape down like my tablecloth to my table so it doesn't go away. It's duct tape. It has endless uses, and studio use, definitely some of those as well. Now, if you've never heard of frog tape as a painter, shame on you, because this stuff is awesome. People are like, oh, well, if I need a nice tape line, I'll just use masking tape or the blue stuff. 1, the blue stuff sucks. 2, the blue stuff is also just blue masking tape. They didn't do anything to it. They just made it blue instead of white. That's it. Frog tape does exactly what your masking tape should do. Now, one thing with masking tape is if you don't apply it properly, especially on canvas, you can get that bleed under effect. Frog tape doesn't do that. It actually works the way it's supposed to. Granted, this stuff, it's in a little sealed container, so it's like, ooh, it actually might last a while. It actually does have a limited, not shelf life, but shelf life after it's opened. So they say on the back of it that it's like you have to use it within 21 days. You still can use it after that. It's not quite as effective. It becomes a little bit closer to just being regular masking tape at that point. But those first, month-ish, as long as this is sealed, you're good. And I've had this quite a bit longer, and I will continue to use it, and it works about half as well as it would if it was fresh. But that's sort of the whole idea of this, is if you really want that nice, clean, excuse me. If you really want that nice, clean line, this is the stuff to get. Don't get the blue stuff, it's crap. Next up, we've got 70% isopropyl rubbing alcohol. Now, if you've seen my video on cleaning acrylic brushes and cleaning paint out of brushes that have been dried, that's one of the major uses I have for this in the studio. But I'm generally pretty good at taking care of my brushes, although I think I screwed one up the other day, so it's going to be getting a little bit of a soak. But the other major use for this is cleaning off palettes before I use them. So if you guys have seen, again, some of my other videos, you'll know that I use glass palettes. I also mentioned this earlier. And what I use with the glass palettes is I will take a razor blade and just scrape them clean. Now that's good for quick, easy cleanup. But right before I start a painting, I will take some alcohol, drop it in, and take a paper towel, and just give it a nice, quick once-over to clear out any additional paint particles that are left on the palette. If I were to start painting, especially like white, I'm building a sky, and I get any of this residue in the paint, not really desirable at that point. So now I know I have a nice, clean palette to get started and working on a painting with. Now, the other cool thing you can do with rubbing alcohol is that because the properties we just talked about how it dissolves paint out of palettes and off of brushes, you can actually use this to erase sections of your painting. You think, oh, well, it's paint, you just paint over it. and you can't really erase paint. This lets you actually erase paint. Now, you got to be careful with it, especially if you're trying to do like an upper layer thing, because I've actually kind of tried to erase like a tree branch and pulled some of the sky with it. So it's not totally like this is really powerful stuff. So you have to kind of really be careful with it. But if you're just like, maybe there was a brush flung in a different direction, you got all these drips, you can actually kind of maybe pull those away very carefully, very, very carefully. But again, rubbing alcohol lets you actually erase your acrylic paints. Another common one in my studio are metal spike punches. These are actually not specifically for art, because this is the tip of an old dart for a dartboard. It normally has you screw it together and there's that plastic piece and then the feathers. The thing is the little plastic piece, we had a dartboard growing up and they would break all the time. So there's a whole bunch of these, I think, still probably laying around my parents' house. I've got 2 of them. One of the biggest things I use this for is when I'm wiring a canvas, so I'll flip a canvas over, and when I go to put the screw eyes into the wood, I need a guide hole. So I will measure it out, take this, tap it with a hammer, or kind of whatever I have laying around, which is usually a hunk of stone I have sitting over there, and that gives me a nice simple guide hole that I can then screw the screw eye into. Another good use for this is just utility cleaning. So all of the high flow acrylics behind me, little bottles of paints, anything that I need to kind of clear the dried paint out of, I'll like take the cap off and then use this to kind of pick at it. You can use different things. You can use like the back end of your brush or like a sharpened like dowel rod or something like that. But I just find that the metal has a lot less of a chance of breakage, especially if you're, a lot of people are like, oh, just use a toothpick. You have any idea how hard it is to clean dry paint with a toothpick, especially acrylic paint. So there's no chance of anything breaking. It's small enough that I can just get it in my hand and really kind of pick at the paint away and just clean things out really easily. So metal spikes, or a couple of darts, but just, you can probably find metal spikes at the hardware store that do the exact same thing. Next up, we've got an old standby that I use in the studio all the time. Duster, canned air, as it's sometimes known. This stuff is great. It's great if you know what to use it for. I mean, quick blast of air, what do you do with that? So, a number of years ago, I came across this YouTube channel. You can just search it in. It's called The Daily Monster. What this guy did is basically a designer that did some sort of cartoon project on the side, where he would take a blob of ink, in this case India ink, on a piece of paper, and then give it a spray. Like that. And I saw this, and like, this technique is brilliant. Not even like turn it into a monster with a big ink pen or something like that. But I was like, this is a brilliant technique. And it's like, you can kind of do it yourself with just your breath and a straw. But honestly, it's just so much fun to put a blob of ink down and just spray it. Now, I just noticed that spray went all over some stuff in the studio, which is unfortunate, especially on a painting I was want to start, so I guess I got to get some rubbing alcohol. But this is such a cool technique, and that's why I keep it here in the studio. And the final one is paper towels, rags, and Kleenexes. You're like, all right, rags are rags, but I mean, rags are utility. Just because some artists use them for painting doesn't mean every artist has to use them for painting. But I use each of them differently in 4 different things. Rags are almost exclusively just to wipe my brushes off on if I'm not just using my pants, which I actually do quite often. But I have a whole box of rags. Rags are also really good, especially when you start getting dried paint in them, to be able to do lifting and textural work, both with acrylics as well as with watercolors and gouache. So it really kind of creates a nice sort of grubby texture on that. Also being able to kind of pull paint away for subtractive techniques, it's the rags. Paper towels I find to be a little bit more interesting. I actually have 2 different types of paper towels in the studio. I have standard textured paper towels, which are just, again, regular utility. You saw me grab one earlier when I was wiping the palette off. I do that all the time. Cleaning brushes off, stuff like that. I also have some of the soft, clothy paper towels. Viva makes some of these. I don't know if anyone else actually does, but these are great paper towels because they're soft. They feel almost just like cotton. They're sort of cottony in their feel. These are really specific paper towels. I use these for working with watercolors in particular, so I'll use it to kind of wipe my brush on or do some lifting techniques. You can actually almost reuse these paper towels. You can get a square of them and rinse them and wring them out, and they're still good. So I like kind of have these for things like that. tend to avoid using them for acrylics because acrylics will kind of destroy them. And finally, Kleenexes, or tissues. I always have a box of these in the studio. One, to blow my nose with when I need to, because they're Kleenexes, but also I will grab them when using acrylics and watercolors, being able to get a little bit of a ball to it, and they're really good for like quick lifting because they're so absorbent. Specifically with watercolors, because I can really kind of get a good textural absorbent quality with these that I can't really get with paper towels. I mean, you can, but then you get the texture element. This takes the texture element out, and you just get the shape, which is really, really cool. So those are 5 of my sort of studio tools that aren't really supposed to be used for painting. I've got more, trust me, I've got a lot more, but I think those are sort of more accessible, and I think probably the ones that might be useful to you. So what about you guys? Do you use some weird tools in your studio or your maybe art table or wherever you happen to work that maybe aren't really designed for painting, but you've sort of found them useful and you put them into your working set? Or has anything in this video maybe inspired you to try something out for yourself? Regardless of your situation, let me know in comments below. Hit that like button if you learned something. Consider supporting on Patreon. This has been from Cinderblock Studios, and I will see you guys next time. That's gotta be the best outro I've done in like 6 months. Wow, that was good. That was really good.